He got out. For years, Dominic Musa Schmitz was a radical Islamist. Many of his companions at the time are now fighting for the so-called Islamic State in Syria. He is now battling against its ideology, like in this play at the theater in Cologne.
I wanted to belong. I wanted to be the best. I threw out all my rap CDs and stopped eating pork. I was a rebel. I was in charge and was finally somebody special. Everybody recognized me.
He's shed the Arab garments, the cap and the long beard. Dominic wears jeans again and shakes women's hands. But the path back from radical Islam was tough. What fascinated you back then about radical Islam?
I found the answers I was seeking. When I was 17, reading books by philosophers was too complicated. I thought the simplistic answers were much more attractive. Radical Islam provided me with a structure where one didn't exist. Islam decided for me because you don't make decisions, you just follow.
Weil man trifft keine Entscheidungen mehr, man folgt einfach.
A year ago, I met Dominic in his hometown of Mönchengladbach for the first time. Back in 2005, he had found recognition in a Salafist community here. He met controversial Muslim preachers such as Sven Lau and Pierre Vogel and worked as their assistant. He became a missionary for radicalism.
Musa, Bruder im Islam. Wie war deine erste Begegnung mit dem Islam?
Islam ist Friede, Brüderlichkeit und also immer schön, ja, auf jeden Fall.
Why did you make that video?
That was Pierre Vogel's idea. He said it was my obligation to tell people about my story as a motivation for non-practicing Muslims. So they would see that, aha, he's doing that as a German. What's with me? Why don't I?
Aha, das ist ein Deutscher, der setzt das alles und so. Was ist da mit mir? Warum tue ich das nicht?
Take Islam into every German home was the slogan that quickly became Dominic Musa Schmidt's raison d'être. But his surroundings grew more and more radical. He began to distance himself from his companions. He moved away from Mönchengladbach. The city had become too dangerous, especially now after he wrote a book about his time in the Islamist community and its many dangers.
Hatred has grown, and so is perhaps the potential for violence. People have written to me, Mr. Schmitz is lucky there's no Sharia law here, or else he'd be dead. Or after the Brussels attacks, people wrote, those IS fighters, they're just waiting to slit everybody's throats.
Can you understand what motivates people to go from being radicalized youths to attackers?
These attackers are driven by their unbridled hatred of the West, which they see as murdering their sisters and brothers, and bombing Syria, or at the time, Iraq. These people believe that the West wants to destroy Islam.
That's what Dominic once believed as well. But at some point he started to ask questions. He couldn't convince his best friend, however, to turn his back on radicalism. That friend is now a commander of an IS troop in Syria.
If I'd remained in this milieu with that kind of input for many, many years, and if this hatred and alienation had continued to grow, then I would have probably ended up in Syria or in some other so-called theocracy.
Taking to the battlefield was out of the question for Dominic, but he also didn't want to turn away from religion. His aim now is to teach others to be a critical Muslim, instead of falling into the trap of the preachers of hate.